I'm Jared Bowen. Coming up on Open Studio, it's Pharaoh of the opera. Countertenor Anthony Roth Costanzo talks about his star turn as Akhnaten and life beyond the pyramids. Then we remember George Fifield, the visionary who was the founder and director of Boston Cyberarts. Plus, with the hit musical Hamilton back in Boston, we revisit my conversation with original cast member Leslie Odom Jr. Then it's the rooms where it happens, a museum exhibition that looks at the life of Alexander Hamilton. It's all now on Open Studio. First up, countertenor Anthony Roth Costanzo has made a name for himself, starring in the Metropolitan Opera's production of Akhnaten. But he's also figuratively found his voice and sense of fun collaborating with performer Justin Vivian Bond. I caught up with Costanzo when he was in Boston performing the dual roles of Dracula and Dionysus in the opera The Lord of Cries, presented by the Boston Modern Orchestra Project and Odyssey Opera. Anthony Roth Costanzo, thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
To start, for people who don't know what a countertenor is, how do you describe it?
You know, I sing in this very high register, which a lot of people call falsetto, and it is falsetto. It's this high voice, but falsetto has such an interesting history, beginning in the 18th century with castrati, the castrated men, who Handel and Mozart and Gluck and Vivaldi wrote all this operatic repertoire for. But it's really carried forward. Those castrati were the superstars of their era. And we see today a lot of falsetto singers in pop music, and we just assume that's the way it is, you know, from Prince to Michael Jackson to the Bee Gees to Justin Timberlake. There's lots of high male singing, and basically I do the same thing but in an operatic way.
And how do you do that with your voice? Is it a reach to find it?
You know, it's a little bit of a technique, but basically when you sing, your vocal cords come together and they vibrate. But if you bring them fully together because they're long as a male, then you have a lower voice, just like the long strings on a piano are lower. But I artificially shorten them. So I make a little chink, and through that chink, air escapes. But I try and minimize that, but it sort of artificially shortens the chords.
And why do you do it?
When I was a boy soprano, I sang on Broadway, and then I did opera, and I loved singing high. And I never associated pitch with gender, which is something we do a lot in culture. We think that high is female and low is male, and therefore a male singing high is emasculated in some way. But I've never experienced it that way. I feel it's an expression of my identity.
I read that you use imagery when you sing. It's not something I've heard a lot of singers talk about.
So how do I get these muscles and this whole mechanism to function the way I want? Well, if I send an image from my brain along with the impulse saying sing, it can kind of move the involuntary muscles in one way or another. So sometimes, you know, you're singing and you go, that's it felt great. But how can I recreate that feeling? Well, let's imagine a flower blooming, or let's imagine, you know, an oar going into the water, or something like that. And if you use that imagery, it actually trains your imagination to control those muscles a little better.
Then I wonder, when you're performing, how does that coalesce with acting?
Absolutely. You know, I think that acting is the foundation of what I do. And every musical choice I make is based on the drama or the story that I want to tell. Even if I'm singing Philip Glass and there are no words, I still want to tell a story. I still want the audience to experience an emotional reaction to the sound that's coming out of me. So I try and make every musical and vocal choice based on either character, narrative, or some kind of emotional landscape, at least, that I'm putting forward. So even when I'm warming up and I'm going, ah, ha, 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 instead of just making it bland, I go, okay, well, what would that sound like if it was really sad? Ha, 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 and it changes the nature of the sound.
When you were younger, you had thyroid cancer, and, of course, the treatment targeted the throat, the vocal cords, that vicinity. I'm wondering what kind of existential moment that was for you now, especially as you consider what your life is now.
I feel so lucky to have had that experience, where they scraped my thyroid off my vocal nerves, and that could have meant I wasn't going to sing again. And I had to think to myself, well, are you defined by singing? And what I realized is I'm defined by my creativity, by my desire to connect people through art. And so how can I have the most impact doing that? Sometimes it's singing, sometimes it's creating a production, helping other people use their voices metaphorically and literally in different ways.
And what does that mean for the role of singing in your life now?
Well, I love every moment and every day that I can sing. I love the act of it, and I love the catharsis of it from my own experience. But I also like what it can do, especially the countertenor, in terms of drawing people in and making this art form, which can seem very obscure and sometimes shrouded in elite institutions and things like that, more accessible.
I suspect that's where An Octave Apart comes in.
An Octave Apart is a show that I created with the incredible trans cabaret legend Justin Vivian Bond. And it began because I wanted to find a sort of exhilaration in classical singing. Sometimes it feels very pure and very beautiful, but where's the exhilaration you get in a rock concert? So in the image of Julie Andrews and Carol Burnett at Carnegie Hall, Vivian and I created this show called Only an Octave Apart.
Under pressure.
Our voices, though an octave apart, seem worlds different, and yet we come together and find this musical synergy and also this personal connection through the exploration of identity and the voice. And it is both hilarious and poignant, and there's an album that we made of it that's out, so you can listen to it if you couldn't see the show.
And the riverbank talks of the waters of March. It's the end of all strain. It's the joy in your heart.
When you went back and listened to the album, what most struck you that totally works?
We chose this one song that's a Peter Gabriel-Kate Bush duet, Don't Give Up. I was singing, rather, the Peter Gabriel part, and Viv was singing the Kate Bush part, and I'm talking about struggling so much with my life. And Viv's voice comes on and says, don't give up, you still have us.
But no one wants you when you lose. Don't give up, 'cause you have friends.
I watched your Tiny Desk concert, by the way, and you just looked like you were having a ball.
I have the best time with Justin Vivian Bond I've ever had on stage. And doing this whole project, I feel more like myself than I ever had on stage. Often I'm portraying a character or in a costume, and here I really am myself and have to find a way to actually perform myself and my singing on stage.
Well, speaking of your characters, you have become so synonymous now with Akhnaten. How do you take that? How do you accept that mantle?
Isn't it funny if you do something in your life and you think to yourself, when I die, if I'm lucky enough to get an obituary, someone will write, oh, he, famously played Akhnaten.
The nudity, is that a brave choice? Would you consider it a brave choice?
I think it serves a function in the storytelling, or I wouldn't do it. You see this soon-to-be pharaoh in the most vulnerable human state possible, and you see him in a very cis-male beginning that morphs over the course of the opera into a much more female incarnation. So it raises interesting questions. It brings the audience along on an intimate journey. In terms of my own approach, it is terrifying every time. And so I guess there's an element of bravery about it. But there's also a sense of freedom. When you step on the stage, you accept that there's no going back because you're in front of thousands of people and you don't have any clothes on. So this is what it is. And then you let go. And instead of focusing people on the nudity aspect, you focus them on the kind of ritualistic aspect it can embody.
So last November, you played Dracula for Boston Modern Orchestra Project. This is a piece written for you. What's that responsibility like?
Well, John Corigliano is a composer I've loved since I was a teenager. I feel thrilled that he wrote it for me, and with a role that is so rich, so juicy, so vocally challenging. And simultaneously a popular culture story, that is Dracula, but also brings in these Greek retellings from Euripides that give a whole nother dimension to it.
And it goes to what I think you were talking about earlier, about changing the form and creating new and something unexpected.
You know, opera is a living art form, and we have to find ways for it to continue to morph and to grow and to be an outgrowth of our current time.
Well, it's been such a pleasure to be with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for a beautiful interview.
Next, we remember George Fifield. He was an artist and curator who championed innovations in art and new media. For decades, he was an integral influence and presence in the Boston art scene, which culminated in his founding of the Boston Cyberarts Festival and later Gallery. He died in November. A new exhibition and remembrance titled George is on view now at Boston Cyberarts Gallery. The last time we spoke with George Fifield was in April for our story on the role of NFTs and their influence on the art world. We started the conversation by asking artists and observers of the art world, what is an NFT?
NFTs are a new way to sell and buy and show that you own a piece of digital artwork.
It's a token, or I think of it as like a certificate of authenticity that exists online.
Art is perfectly, suited to it because it's digital, because it can be copied easily, and because you want to have something which lets everybody know, I own this.
Joining us for NFT time is George Fifield, founding director of Boston Cyberarts, Sebastian Smee, art critic for the Washington Post, and Brooklyn-based digital artist Ann Spalter. What does this do for your place in the art world?
So one of the exciting things it's done is help validate and give credibility to these amazing artists who have been creating digital artwork for many years, and sometimes facing enormous hostility for doing so.
Because historically, digital art hasn't been taken seriously. But undaunted, Spalter continues to push forward, using artificial intelligence to create some of her surrealist-inspired imagery. Every sale of her NFT work is recorded on the blockchain or a digital ledger. That's key if the work sells again. When a piece of work sells at auction, the artist generally doesn't get any of that revenue, especially if it sells for millions of dollars and they painted it earlier in their career. How does this change it for you?
The NFT market changes that. You often get 10% royalties on the work, and that's a huge thing. As an artist, if you wake up and your work has resold, the first time that happened to me, and I saw that I'd received 10% on it, it was literally like an emotional thing. I felt like crying, like it was huge.
$69 million is how much a work by the artist Beeple fetched at auction last year. Before that, the relatively unknown artist's work sold for less than $100, and hardly anyone had heard of NFTs.
The work was bid up by people who were in the sphere of cryptocurrencies and so on. And they had a vested interest, clearly. They wanted to create a lot of hype. So this worked out really well for Beeple. I'm happy for him. He seems like a really nice guy. But it's an insane amount of money.
The part of it to me that feels like, is this all about marketing? Is this all about advertising? How do you define the legitimate line here?
I think to some extent it is. I would say it's about creating a commodity. We're entering this whole new world with the metaverse, with cryptocurrencies and so on, where people are going to be, they already are, buying and selling things that exist only digitally. And, I guess it's evolved out of, in-game purchases in video games or in-app purchases. I think we're going to see a lot of the people who were very skeptical about it at first, including in some cases myself, realizing that no, there is some amazing stuff being done here and we need to pay attention to it.
Like the work George Fifield has been presenting at Boston Cyberarts for decades, including a recent show featuring NFT artists.
I like to say about Boston Cyberarts, the artists we show regard code as their creative medium. And this just was another step in the logical progression of exploring how artists use technology to make art.
But what troubles Fifield is the business side of NFTs, which can be purchased via auctions, galleries, or directly through artists. But people pay using cryptocurrency. Is this a fad?
I think the more interesting question is it a bubble? So that's one of the things that truly scares me, is this idea that you're buying something which changes its value, art, in a currency that changes its value, currency, all the time.
So we've learned that NFTs are a boon for digital artists. They're invigorating for curators always looking toward the horizon. But what does it mean for the future of art? Sebastian Smee says he's no Nostradamus, but
that is the bet that people like Mark Zuckerberg and many other companies are placing, that we will be more and more online. We'll have avatars. A whole bunch of possibilities will open up. I think that there's still going to be a hunger for physical works of art, almost as an antidote to that. I think it already exists. People love to go to museums. They're doing so in record numbers, partly because it's a way to get away from all things digital. And I think that will continue to be the case, and that urge will perhaps only get stronger.
we are a nation that just can't quit Hamilton. With the hit musical back in Boston, we tap into the founding father fever, revisiting the conversation I had with Leslie Odom Jr., who won a Tony Award for playing Aaron Burr. I caught up with him when he was in Boston, collaborating with the Boston Pops in 2017.
The falling leaves drift by my window. Falling leaves of red and gold. I see your lips, summer kisses, sunburned hands I used to hold.
Leslie Odom Jr., thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
So it's barely been a year since you've been out of Hamilton. I know that you've talked about the fact that it was so monumental that you couldn't even digest it. Have you even in this year been able to settle on what happened to you in your life and career?
You know, it's just opened so many doors. It was important that we didn't change the feeling of the show because we were suddenly a big success. And so there was just a lot of it that I didn't get to feel in that moment, but I'm starting to now.
Well, how did you shut it out? It was so monumental.
It was loud, right? It was loud around it. Because I believed in the material so much, the material would drop me right in.
You have said that you knew right from the beginning that Aaron Burr was this incredible character. And did you feel that about the show writ large?
Oh, yeah. If you've been in the business for 15 minutes, which, I've been doing it for, 15 years, it's like you know it when you see it. I mean, this is special. I've worked on new pieces that come to me in various forms of readiness. So to get something like Hamilton on my desk that was so fully baked, before we even touched it, was just so ready.
You've also said that you understand that this could be the biggest thing that you've done in your career.
Yeah.
I can't imagine what that must be like to think at your young age, it could be past already.
Yeah. What are you going to do? It's like, you're lucky if it ever happens. You're lucky if it ever happens. If you get to be in something that's like, artistically fulfilling and commercially successful and culturally relevant, you take a beat and you say thank you and you appreciate it and then you move on from it.
Is it a life changer? Has it changed you?
Yeah. There's a question that you have as a performer. It's like, you wonder if you have the stuff, if you're good enough, because it's all a theory. It's all just a theory until somebody gives you the chance to prove it. And Lynn gave us the chance to prove it.
There were a lot of question marks on this role for me, in this show for me, at the start of it, and what cleared it away was love.
I understand that you turned down a television show, security, something with a huge platform, so that you could do something unknown, which it was at that time, in Hamilton. Where did that conviction come from?
There are those things in your life that won't let you rest. I tried to do the TV show. I tried to turn down it because that was the thing that made sense on paper. My mom needs a new roof. I have debt. I tried to make the smart financial decision, and I would be, in the middle of the night, I'd wake up out of my sleep like, what am I doing? I have to do this show. I know it doesn't make any sense. I have to do Hamilton. It was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and I knew that. And so I did the crazy thing. The crazy thing was walking away from, a guaranteed, salary that would get my mom that roof, that would get me out of debt, walking away from that and grabbing a hold of this thing that meant so much to me.
You always have had Broadway in your sights, it seems. Why musical theater?
It feels like it was always, but it wasn't always. I didn't know what Broadway was. I didn't know it existed. We didn't go see Broadway shows when I was a kid. A ticket, I think, a top price ticket when I was growing up was like $75. So, for a family of four, like that was not feasible for my family at that time. So, there was a show that kind of permeated the consciousness in the same way that Hamilton has when I was coming up, called Rent. There was a show called Rent, and that found its way to me in Philadelphia, the way it found its way across the country, and it touched me, it moved me.
Are you performing a song from Rent?
Yes.
I heard that.
The flowers bloom, the children play, the stars gleam.
Where do you go from here? I mean, you basically have carte blanche, I would imagine. And what do you do now to fulfill yourself most artistically?
I think I just make sure I'm not wasting my time. I want to be in rooms that make me come alive. I want to be in rooms where I'm learning. And so, that was the Murder on the Express set over in London. That is with my daughter at home and my wife. And who knows? A new album, I don't know. But I have to be moving forward. That's what's next. That's always what's next.
Well, Leslie Odom Jr., thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Finally, Hamilton takes a curtain call by way of a museum exhibition in Houston, which focuses on the life of the founding father and the historical objects that informed him.
We are in Bayou Bend, which was the home of Houston philanthropist Miss Ima Hogg. She was building the house in the late 1920s. She'd begun collecting early American furniture and continued to build and grow that collection through the time that she decided to make it a gift to the Museum of Fine Arts Houston. The world of Alexander Hamilton, we had some really interesting things. We have objects that were specifically related to himself and his world, things that might have been in the possession, say, of the Schuyler family. We have prints and images of people represented in the show, like Alexander Hamilton, Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, Henry Laurens, and many others. We have, for example, a service of Chinese export porcelain that was owned by Thomas Willing, the man who was the first president of the Bank of the United States. So it's not out of the question that Alexander Hamilton dined from that china. And then there's a chair that we believe was owned by Philip Schuyler and was part of a larger set of furniture that he's known to have owned. This is what's called a roundabout chair. It's the kind of chair that would have been placed probably in front of a desk or such as that. And it is made in such a way that it enforces a peculiarly masculine posture on the sitter, you might say. So it's definitely a man's chair. It's a beautiful object. It has wonderful expressions of symmetry that few other forms of American furniture of that time period have. It's got a wonderful provenance or ownership history, and all those things together, I think, make it an exceptional object. The members of the cast were quite taken with it, too.
Doing the show, and even in just creating the character, trying to get inside of his head, there's imagery that I tried to make up in my own mind. Like, okay, what is it like to be in Philip Schuyler's mansion? What is it like to be standing on the battlefield? So getting to actually be in there and see, the objects and the pictures and all of that helped to strengthen that imagery, and it was pretty cool.
The world of Alexander Hamilton came to be, I think, largely through the efforts of folks in our education division and, who were early fans of the show and saw this opportunity and started to think about the story that's in Chernow's book and the story that's in the play, and to think about the objects that we have that touch on it. And so the way that they crafted those things and placed them together and are able to knit together a sequence of objects that relates to the sequence of the story, I think is a really remarkable thing that they've been able to achieve, and we're pleased that these objects can serve that purpose.
And that is all for this edition of Open Studio. Next week, we're firing on all cylinders at Madhouse Motors, a veritable artist's workshop where the sculptures are motorcycles. You can always find us online at gbh.org/openstudio, and you can see us first on youtube.com/gbhnews. Remember, too, to follow us on Instagram and Twitter at OpenStudioGBH. I'm at the Jared Bowen. We hope to see you here next week. Until then, I am Jared Bowen. Thanks for joining us. Every Friday, Jim Browdy and Marjorie Egan offer up live performances on Boston Public Radio. So we leave you now with Ray Angry of The Roots, performing what he describes as a mix of his favorite works.